spoiler alert, season 2 is on the way, so in the end, he obviously didn't himself. Just like Jeffrey Epstein. Shut up! I know he's your friend, but I don't care.
We're watching a scandal explode in real time, the kind that doesn't just resurface, it detonates. And this time, the blast radius is wider than anyone expected. Because right now, as we speak, the most powerful names in politics, entertainment, and global finance are scrambling. Why? Because Bill Clinton just did something no one saw coming. He didn't just respond to the latest dump of Epstein-related files. He demanded the full, unredacted release of every single document tied to his name. And by extension, to the names of hundreds of others who've spent years praying this moment would never come. Let's be clear about the timing. It's December 28, 2025. The Department of Justice was legally required to publish all Epstein files by December 19th. They missed the due date. Then, in a move that looked more like damage control than transparency, they dropped a fraction of the records. Hundreds of thousands of pages, yes, but a sliver of the 300 gigabytes they've been sitting on. Photos of Clinton lounging with Ghislaine Maxwell, Mick Jagger at Epstein's table, Michael Jackson in the same frame as the convicted financier, all released without context, without dates, without explanation. Just raw, unfiltered imagery dumped onto the internet like chum in shark-infested waters. And then, the bombshell. The DOJ admitted they just uncovered another 1 million documents. Documents they claim to have only now discovered, despite Congress ordering their release months ago. Documents that conveniently will take weeks more to review.
The Justice Department has finally released some of the highly anticipated Epstein files. More than 300,000 pages of documents related to the late convicted sex offender were made public today. They include photos, flight logs, grand jury testimony, and a lot of heavy redactions.
Clinton's team didn't wait. By Monday, his spokesperson, Angel Urania, wasn't just pushing back. He was accusing the DOJ of playing games. The message was blunt. If there's nothing to hide, release everything. Not just the photos of Clinton in a hot tub with Maxwell, not just the flight logs or the party snapshots, but the full unedited paper trail. And here's where the subtext became impossible to ignore. Urania didn't stop at defending Clinton. He pointed a finger at the selective nature of the releases, suggesting someone was being shielded, someone with more to lose. The internet didn't need a roadmap to connect the dots. Within hours, the same question was everywhere. If this isn't about Clinton, then who is it about? And why does the timing reek of desperation? Because let's talk about that timing. The files were dropped late on a Friday, the classic PR move for burying bad news. But this wasn't just bad news. It was a controlled detonation. The DOJ knew exactly what they were doing.
Apparently not everything. We've got indications from the Department of Justice that there are things that are going to be withheld, at least, or handed out at a later date. Now, the law in this case that was passed by Congress and signed by President Trump required that all the Epstein files be released by midnight tonight, Friday, December 19th.
They released just enough to reignite the firestorm. Clinton and compromising photos, a fake letter allegedly from Epstein to Larry Nassar, vague references to Trump's Mar-a-Lago, but not enough to answer the big questions. Not the 60-count draft indictment from 2007 that never saw daylight. Not the 82-page memo detailing Epstein's network. Not the names of the powerful figures who, according to survivors, were regulars at his properties. Instead, we got a mess. Heavily redacted pages, inconsistent blurring of faces, and a search function so useless it might as well not exist. As one lawyer for the survivors put it, this wasn't transparency. It was a distraction. And then came the backlash. Victims' advocates slammed the DOJ for exposing survivors' identities in unredacted sections. Lawmakers like Ro Khanna, who co-wrote the transparency law, warned that officials could face prosecution for obstruction. Meanwhile, the White House, already under fire for Pam Bondi's handling of the releases, found itself in an impossible position. Bondi, the Attorney General handpicked by Trump, had promised full compliance. Now, she's the one being publicly challenged by a former president to prove there's nothing left to hide. Because here's the thing, if the DOJ really had cleaned house, why are they still redacting? Why are they still discovering new documents? And why does every new batch feel like a negotiation? What they'll show versus what they'll bury. The panic isn't just about Clinton, it's about the domino effect. Because once you start pulling this thread, the whole fabric unravels. Take the photos, for example. Clinton in a swimsuit with Maxwell? Damning, sure. But he's not the only one in those files. There's Mick Jagger, dining with Epstein like they're old friends. There's Michael Jackson, caught in a candid shot that's already sparking 1,000 conspiracy theories. There's Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, Diana Ross, all in the same orbit, all in frames that raise more questions than answers. And then there's the inventory from Epstein's home. Feminine hygiene products stocked like a pharmacy, notes about curable viruses that could cause impotence, a 96-page incident report from the original Palm Beach investigation. None of this is new, technically, but the context, the timing, That's what's turning old rumors into fresh ammunition.
We've seen dozens of new photos we haven't seen before of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell with very high-profile people, celebrities, people like Mick Jagger and Michael Jackson, like you showed, also like British royalty and actors. All of that we sort of knew was happening. I want to highlight specifically two for the public interest, and that is President Clinton and President Trump.
And let's not forget the Trump factor. The former president's name appears in the files, too. Flight logs, a lawsuit alleging he smiled and nodded when Epstein presented a minor as a good one. Trump's team has denied everything, of course, but the silence since the latest drop has been deafening. No tweets, no statements. Just a single telling quote from years ago resurfaced by the internet. I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. That was 2002. Now, in 2025, with the files leaking and Clinton demanding full disclosure, Trump's playbook is predictable. Deflect, deny, and let the noise drown out the details. But this time, the noise is working against him. Because here's what we're really looking at. A high-stakes game of chicken between the DOJ and the most powerful people on the planet.
Brings it all together with a bow for her, doesn't it? She probably wants to get out early. So I think that we have more digging to do. I think the DOJ transparency effort here is the right thing, but the reason it's on a Friday, Will, is I think there are no smoking guns. There's other places we have to look.
The DOJ claims they're protecting victims, but survivors say their identities were exposed anyway. The DOJ says they're following the law, but lawmakers say they're violating it. The DOJ says they need more time, but the public isn't buying it. Not when the files keep trickling out in ways that feel curated. Not when the most damning material, the draft indictments, the internal memos, the full flight manifests, is still missing. And not when the same names keep surfacing in the whispers. Politicians who took Epstein's money, celebrities who partied at his homes, executives who flew on his planes. The list is long. The evidence so far is fragmented. But the pattern? That's what's terrifying. And now, the pressure is on Pam Bondi. Clinton's demand wasn't just a legal request. It was a challenge. Release everything or admit you're hiding something. Because if the files are as clean as the DOJ claims, why the games? Why the delays? Why the sudden discovery of 1 million new pages? The internet has already decided this isn't about paperwork. It's about leverage. It's about who holds the power to bury the past and who's about to lose it. Meanwhile, the survivors are watching. They've spent years fighting for this moment, only to see their stories treated like a political football. One victim's lawyer put it best. They had a year to prepare. They had binders full of evidence, and now, at the last minute, they're acting like this is a surprise? The anger isn't just about the redactions. It's about the performance. The way the DOJ is framing this as a logistical nightmare when, in reality, it looks like a calculated stall.
Her testimony that there is an effort to clear Trump specifically. A lot of the questions are specifically about Trump. A lot of the answers very complimentary even in particular sections to him. But you just made the point to me that she's actually doing even more than that.
And then there's the question no one's answering. What happens when the full files do drop? Because if the photos we've seen so far are just the appetizer, the main course could be catastrophic. We're talking about a network that allegedly spanned continents, that included heads of state, that operated with impunity for decades. The draft indictment from 2007, it wasn't just about Epstein, it was about his associates. The 82-page memo, it reportedly named names. And the flight logs, they don't just show who flew, they show how often. So when Bill Clinton says, release it all, he's not just defending himself, he's calling a bluff. And the silence from the other side is deafening. Because if the DOJ really had nothing to hide, they'd have dropped everything on December 19th. Instead, they gave us a tease, a distraction, a way to keep the public fighting over Clinton's hot tub photos while the real bombs stay locked in the vault.
I want to know how Epstein made the money that he did. I want to know what the transactions are he was involved in. And that should all be something that the Treasury Department, the FBI can get access to, because in the meantime, what we're left with is Ghislaine Maxwell effectively downplaying this whole thing. Yeah, he was he hid it from everybody. Nobody else was involved. There's no proof of anything else. There's no blackmail. There's no foreign intelligence tie.
But here's the problem with that strategy. The internet doesn't forget. And the survivors, they're not backing down. Neither are the lawmakers who've threatened contempt charges if the DOJ doesn't comply. Neither are the journalists digging through the mess, the insiders leaking what they know, the public demanding answers. This isn't just a scandal. It's a reckoning, and reckonings don't stay contained. Now, the ball is in Pam Bondi's court, and the clock is ticking. Because if the next release is as incomplete as the last one, the backlash won't just be about transparency. It'll be about complicity. And in a town where power is the only currency, that's the one thing even the most connected can't survive. The files are coming. The question is no longer if, but what and who they'll destroy when they do.
Again, there was new names in some of the emails that I think investigators need to look at. In particular, I jumped on the name of a modeling agent who, in a similar fashion to Jean-Luc Brunel, who brought underage girls from overseas to Jeffrey Epstein for abuse. There was another man. What was interesting about this other individual is that he also apparently provided young models for Donald Trump's modeling agency.
The deeper we dig, the clearer it becomes. This isn't just about what's in the files, it's about what's missing, and the gaps are telling a story of their own. Because while the DOJ drips out photos of Clinton in a swimsuit or Mick Jagger at a dinner table, the real action is happening in the shadows, where the money flowed, where the favors were called in, and where the most powerful players ensured their names would never see the light of day. Let's talk about the financial trails first. Epstein's empire didn't run on charm alone. It ran on transactions, some legal, some buried in shell companies, some allegedly funneled through offshore accounts that still haven't been fully traced. And here's where things get interesting. Because while the public files focus on the socialite snapshots, the real paper trail leads to banks, to law firms, to the kind of quiet, high-dollar exchanges that don't show up in party photos. Take the flight logs, for example. We've heard about the celebrities, the politicians, the occasional royal. But what about the other passengers? The ones whose names aren't household brands, but whose influence is just as potent? We're talking about CEOs, media moguls, even a few names tied to Silicon Valley's elite. These aren't just random faces. These are people who, according to insiders, had reasons to stay on Epstein's good side, whether for funding, for access, or for the kind of leverage that doesn't expire. And yet, their names are conspicuously absent from the latest releases. Why? Because the flight logs we've seen so far are just the tip of the iceberg. The full manifests, the ones that allegedly include coded references to special guests, are still locked away. And if the DOJ is really committed to transparency, why haven't we seen them? Then there's the question of the enablers.
Well, Major, I think it reinforced the research that I did on my book that Jeffrey Epstein has always viewed himself as smarter than everybody else, and he also has collected people all along the way, particularly over the 2 decades through his trafficking. And that was always to get secrets and bits of information about individuals that he could pass to other people. He trafficked in this.
Because Epstein didn't operate alone. He had a network, lawyers who structured his deals, bankers who moved his money, even a few well-placed fixers who, according to former associates, made problems disappear. Some of these names have surfaced in passing, like the late Jean-Luc Brunel, the modeling agent tied to Epstein's circle who took his own life before facing trial. But others, they're still in the game, still connected, still, allegedly, pulling strings. And if the files ever fully drop, their roles won't just be embarrassing, they could be criminal. Because let's not forget, Epstein's 2008 plea deal wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a negotiation. And negotiations like that don't happen without powerful people on both sides of the table. Which brings us to the blackmail theory. It's the elephant in the room, the whisper that won't go away.
And I think these things like Epstein, and there's probably a bunch of other similar operations that are being run, they provide you with like a really good time, or maybe you're a high profile, extremely wealthy individual, and it's hard for you to get hosed. And some guy tells you, hey, we've got everything covered. You know, you come to my island, nothing, you know, what happens on the island stays on the island.
Because if Epstein's operation was really just about personal indulgence, why the meticulous record-keeping? Why the cameras in every room? Why the alleged stash of tapes and photos that, according to multiple sources, were his real insurance policy? We're not talking about grainy security footage. We're talking about leverage, the kind that could explain why certain investigations stalled, why certain names never made it into court filings, why certain people seem untouchable no matter how close they got to the fire. And if that material exists, where is it now? Because if the FBI really has everything as they claim, then why are we still only seeing the scraps? Meanwhile, the media's role in all this can't be ignored. Because while some outlets are digging, others are distracting. The same photos of Clinton and Maxwell get recycled endlessly, while the financial ties, the legal maneuvering, the whispers about foreign intelligence connections, those stories get buried. Why? Because the people who control the narrative have a vested interest in keeping the focus narrow. On the celebrities, on the salacious, on anything but the systemic rot that allowed this to happen in the first place. And let's be real. The moment a major network starts connecting the dots between Epstein's donors and, say, a sitting senator's campaign funds, the lawyers come out. The threats fly. The story gets re-evaluated. Sound familiar? But here's where it gets even messier, because the Epstein case isn't an isolated scandal. It's a node in a much larger web. We're talking about connections to other high-profile cases. The ones that got quietly settled, the ones where key witnesses recanted, the ones where evidence mysteriously vanished. Remember the 2019 raid on Epstein's Manhattan mansion? The one where agents allegedly found a safe full of diamonds, a fake passport, and a trove of digital files? We've heard about the diamonds. We've seen the passport. But the digital files? The ones that could have contained emails, messages, maybe even video? Those have barely been mentioned in the recent releases. Why? Because, according to a former federal prosecutor who worked on related cases, some of that material was never fully cataloged, and if it wasn't cataloged, it wasn't released, which means it's still out there, somewhere. And then there's the international angle.
Yeah. Why would you put him in the room and lock him in a bedroom, a tiny little bedroom, with a roided up? Yeah. Just stop and think about that. You're in a room smaller than this studio that you and I are in right now, with a roided up. You're sleeping with that guy.
Because Epstein's operation wasn't just American. It had tendrils in Europe, in the Middle East, in the Caribbean. We're talking about properties in Paris, connections to foreign dignitaries, even allegations of intelligence ties that, if true, would explain a lot about why this case has been handled with kid gloves. Because when you're dealing with that level of exposure, it's not just about reputations. It's about diplomacy. It's about trade deals. It's about the kind of pressure that doesn't come from lawyers. It comes from governments. And if that's the case, then the redactions aren't just about protecting individuals. They're about protecting interests. So where does that leave us? With a DOJ that's either incompetent or complicit. With a media that's either lazy or complicit. With a public that's being fed just enough to stay outraged, but not enough to see the full picture. And with a ticking clock, because the longer this drags out, the more likely it is that someone with access, someone with a conscience, someone with a grudge, decides to leak the rest. Because let's be honest, the people who really don't want these files to drop, they're not the ones posting on social media. They're the ones making phone calls. They're the ones reminding each other about non-disclosure agreements and accidental hard drive wipes. They're the ones who know that the moment the full truth comes out, the house of cards doesn't just wobble, it collapses. And that's why the next few weeks are critical.
There's too much circumstantial evidence that leads me to believe that it was an assassination. You know, I know a lot of people think that he could so a lot of very smart people that I know think he committed suicide. I'm like, there's too many convenient things. The cut wires, the security cameras rather, not working. They weren't cut, right? They just stopped. They didn't function. Security cameras didn't function. The fact that he had shared a cell with this giant former cop.
Because if the DOJ really is sitting on 1 million more documents, then the question isn't just what's in them, it's who's controlling the release. Is it Bondi trying to manage the fallout? Is it Trump's allies ensuring certain names stay buried? Is it someone else entirely? Someone whose name we haven't even heard yet? Because make no mistake, the people who've stayed silent this long aren't going to start talking unless they're forced to. And the only thing that forces them is pressure. Public pressure, legal pressure, the kind of pressure that comes when the world stops accepting half-truths and starts demanding the whole story. But here's the kicker. Even if the files do drop in full, will we really get the truth? Because the most damaging material, the kind that could end careers, trigger investigations, maybe even rewrite history, that stuff doesn't always come in documents. Sometimes it comes from the people who were there, the staff, the survivors, the ones who've stayed quiet because they were paid off or threatened or convinced no one would believe them. And if even one of them decides to speak up now, with the world watching, that's when the real earthquake hits. So we're left with one question. Who's brave enough to pull the pin? Because the files are just at the beginning. The real story is what happens when the dam breaks. And trust us, it's breaking. The only question is who gets washed away when it does. Now, we want to know what you think. Do you believe we'll ever see the full, unredacted truth? Or is this the one scandal powerful enough to stay buried forever? Drop your theories in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Because when the next bombshell drops, you'll want to be the first to see it. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and remember, in a world this corrupt, the truth isn't just out there, it's fighting to get out. We'll see you in the next one.